So hello and welcome back to the Improvement Season podcast. It is me, Pascal Steve, and on the other end, it is Steve Hall. It's a little bit early in the morning. However, I am still sitting here and you know this sound. You've just been waiting for the sound. Oh no, it didn't work out because I just picked a can that was completely destroyed by Katie. And I couldn't open it. Sorry for the disappointing start here to the Improvement Season podcast.
And I've already had my one. This is the last one I've had, though. I'm like, Pascal, I know you mentioned you were going to reduce your caffeine intake. And then actually, everyone in the audience, the people listening, wish Pascal a belated happy birthday. Yeah. Because Pascal had his birthday over the weekend. Yeah. And so got a load of monsters from Katie, which is where I was going with this.
Like, how the hell, you know? The irony is so funny because in years, I haven't considered reducing my caffeine intake. I've never given a gift like a bunch of monsters. And the moment that I'm deciding to actually reduce my caffeine intake, Katie is actually then giving me, I don't know, how many are there in kind of one pallet?
Like 24 or something.
This on top of also additional ones from the watermelon ones. So I think I have now 30 at home. And I'm thinking like, all right, so a reduction of the caffeine intake is not going to happen anytime soon. Actually, we are going to bump it up.
Yeah, I don't know if you might be better than me, Pascal, but with monsters, I'm kind of like, if they're in the house, they're getting consumed. Yes. I have one a day. Yeah. But if like the Iceland near me, they do like an offer for like 8, like buy 2 and they're basically £1 per one, which isn't terrible. It's still expensive, of course, compared to like a coffee. Yeah. But once I buy them, I'm like, right, the next 16 days are going to be one monster a day because I can't, if it's there, I'm like, why would I not have it? It's in the fridge. It's ice cold.
No, absolutely. I can definitely see that. And I'm just trying to get it open somehow here with my spoon. Just give me a second. I can still talk, though. The funny thing is, Steve, that I was traveling, of course, to my tattoo appointment here at the end of the last week. And yeah, I managed to make it happen, actually. And I was at the airport. And as you may know, I'm a huge fan of capitalism. Many people are uninformed about it, how lovely capitalism is, because so many people are shitting on it like, oh yeah, the evil is stemming from capitalism, isn't it? Right? When in reality it offers so many opportunities for us, like protein products at the supermarket is a perfect example of it. There was a trend, there was a high demand, then companies tried to fill that demand and they competed with each other. Because there's then an abundance of products, they need to compete with several different traits, such as pricing, quality, and all that kind of stuff. And that's why we have such a huge amount of good protein products in a short amount of time. Same goes for gym equipment. Over the past years, like CrossFit did so much for even bodybuilding because it caused fitness to be a kind of cool thing and more of a lucrative business endeavor. And that's why we had so many innovations when it comes to fitness equipment, also kind of squatting shoes, right? Back then, you didn't really have a lot to pick and choose from. Now, man, they have gotten good. And this is because of that. Anyway, what I wanted to say is I was at the airport in Berlin. And as we all kind of know, at the airport, it's kind of a monopoly. And it's shamelessly being taken advantage of. I wanted a double espresso. It was ridiculous, Steve. It was, the price was $5.90 for a double espresso. $5.90. That is absolutely insane. My roastery, if I get like 250 grams of just pure beans, is like, I think 20 euros. Not even that. I think it's kind of 16 euros or so. I could buy 3 double espressos at the airport or get 250 grams of pure, lovely espresso beans. I was just shocked.
It's like, I imagine people who drink alcohol, maybe they don't. If you drink alcohol, I imagine like semi-regularly, like I don't know, like every month you maybe have a few beers or something. I imagine they're the people that always, when they go to have a pint, in, say, London or something, you're like, holy shit, it costs that much. I have no idea how much a pint costs, but I know people say it's expensive, especially in London. And I'm the same way though. If I'm at a restaurant, like I never like paying for vegetables. I never like paying for like the beverage, like the drinks there, because I'm like, man, they charge so much for literally you think about like a bag of frozen mixed veg from Lidl costs like less than £2 for a kilo or something, and you buy this and it's like £5 for like a few carrots, and I'm like, fuck this shit, and they cover it in butter. So anyway, I kind of feel you. But I have got better at it, where I never used to even allow myself to like buy a coffee out, because I'm like, hey, I can make it so much cheaper at home. Yeah. But sometimes it's just, I don't know, you're out and about and I just take the hit and I'm like, hey, it's worth it in this situation.
Yeah, and I'm totally willing also to pay a little bit more for a good service and a good product. That's out of question and debate here. And the thing is, though, that many people shit on something like capitalism, when in reality, having a monopoly is much, much worse. Much, much worse. And you can even see it in Germany, for example, when it comes to the train, the train system, the train company, die Deutsche Bahn. It's kind of from the government, and it is so awful in comparison to other countries. And also the infrastructure itself hasn't aged well, and this is being caused by no competition in the market.
It's similar to like Thames Water we have here. Anyway, they did something on our street and we've had a leaking tap for like literally months. And I emailed them months ago to say, actually, you're going to laugh so much at this. This is so frustrating. This is like typical, like, grown-up problems. But anyway, we had the leaking tap. I had a plumber come in. He looked at it. He was like, there's nothing I can do. It's down to Thames Water. They've done something outside. I emailed them. They have like a reply that comes immediately saying they'll reply in 10 days. It was I emailed them several times after that because they weren't coming back to me. And I freaking hate calling because they keep you on hold and they ask for all this information. I'm like, I don't have any of that at hand. I'm like, fuck off. Like, I just replied to my email. Anyway, they emailed me being like, hey, sorry for taking so long to come back to you. Here's £90. We've credited your account. And they're like, you have to call this number to get it like credited to your card, like give us your card details. I call the number and it says, this number's not recognized. They gave me it's not a real number. And I'm just like, for God's sake, you guys are useless. So I emailed them back 10 days until the reply. Let's see what happens. I'm just going to rank up this, like I'm going to have a grand that they owe me eventually and I'll never be able to get it.
And the awful thing is, you don't have any alternative.
Exactly.
You can't punish them with your decision of then going to the competitors. And that is what a monopoly causes. They can do whatever they want, not offer a good service, and still benefit from it.
Yeah.
And that's awful. And while I was at the airport, normally I'm just like, especially when I want and need my coffee, and when I was convinced that I'm actually going to do something, that I go ahead and do it. I may complain then, but I go ahead and do it. But when it then comes to paying money for something that I'm expecting is to be shitty anyway, or not that good, and then seeing the price for it, I was just like, no way. This is awful. And every single thing is like this. There was kind of a liter of water, a bottle, €7. 7 fucking euros for a bottle of water. Like, are you out of your mind? And this is the reason why it kind of what was it calling it, grinds my gears that much.
Oh yeah,
is because it's being taken advantage of a situation where people don't have any kind of choice, and especially when people are there with their kids, for example, and their kids, they're thirsty. Like, what are you supposed to be doing?
You have to take an empty bottle in.
That you can do this. That's the beauty about this airport, but not all of the airports have that, actually.
Oh, like available, what they called fountains and that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah, it's super annoying.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember me and Charlotte like got a breakfast in the airport last time, and I was like, man, it was so bad, and it cost like double what a normal breakfast would cost. So I was like, why? It seems so, I don't know, it's like the start of the holiday, you're like, yeah, this is going to be fun. It's like, this is a shitty start to a holiday. I'm spending so much money for this terrible breakfast, but well, at least we're going on holiday.
It is what it is, right? It is what it is. Steve, how are you doing? You finished the mini-cut?
Yes, so I literally ran it for exactly 4 weeks. I was discussing with you offline, like do I want to continue pushing it or do I want to pull back? And like, how do things like run my time? Like, how's my timeline? And sometimes I definitely overthink these decisions where it's just like, hey, just like whatever makes sense to you in the moment, like just run with that. And then for me, I didn't need to run the mini cut for a particularly long period of time. I didn't need to get particularly lean because I don't get particularly soft in an off season. So 4 weeks was fine, but I had in my head I wanted to hit like 185 pounds. Actually, we have stories on water weight here for both of us for kind of different reasons, but somewhat the same reason in some ways, because it was stress related. And so I was saying to you, I don't know if I said it on air, but my weight on the mini cut was kind of weird. It would like, I drop on the Monday and then all week kind of be stable. And then I drop on the Monday, all week stable type of thing. So it's like a whoosh and then a stabilization. And so I wanted to finish the mini cut around 185 pounds. Like, if not, have a few, like an average of 185, whereas I had an average of like 186 or something. I don't actually know what it was. And then I was just like, screw it. Like, I think my weight will drop off as I enter and have more food. And then I kind of went to maintenance or new predicted maintenance for a day. And then the next day, my weight, actually, no, on the Friday, yeah, my weight came up a little bit. And I was like, I was hoping for maybe a whoosh. And then that day, so another day at maintenance, me and Charlotte went out for pizza, and it was like the saltiest pizza I've had for the longest time. It was super salty, and it had ham on it, which is salty as well. And it was just like super salty. So the next day my weight was even higher, and I was like, oh man, maybe I won't see this whoosh. I know this is water retention, but like, I don't think I'm going to see a below 185, especially because now on Monday, like, I'm going into a surplus. So then the next day it dropped off completely, and I saw below 185 pounds. And then the day after that, so yesterday, it was dropped again by another pound. So I was below 184 pounds. And I was just like, wow, like the water retention is really wild sometimes. It's come back up and stabilized today. And I think it will just start moving up because now I'm in a surplus. But it's just, I'm glad I had and you mentioned this, where you've got enough experience through training, nutrition, tracking your body weight, tracking your nutrition, knowing these variables, that like you can go through that and not be too emotionally tied to any one single data point. Because kind of what happened, it was still surprising in the moment, because I was like, wow, that was a big kind of 2 pound drop and then another pound drop. But when I like think about it, it's like, hey, that kind of makes sense. I was feeling the mini cut towards the end, where I was like, I don't like, it's getting a bit more challenging. I kind of want the mini cut not to leave me in any sort of very fatigued position. And so ending it was definitely the right call, and I'm glad I made that. So yeah, that was kind of my experience.
No, absolutely. And where's your weight today?
Yeah, what was it? I think it was back up to like 185. Okay. I've got them 184.6.
Yeah.
So yeah,
so it was quite reasonable.
It was basically around 185 or slightly above the last week of the mini cut. It jumped up to 186.6, then 184.8, 183.8, and then back up to 184.6.
Yeah.
So I think I did pretty much meet that 185 pound goal when you like average everything out.
It is so interesting, Steve, because the mini cut experience this time around has been quite similar between the two of us. The rate of loss was great. We went in there, and then we realized by the end of things that fatigue was creeping up. It was also mostly caused due to external factors, such as traveling or kind of other stressors. And then we decided to actually then go out of the mini cut, because we both knew pushing further is not really necessary, but making that transition is sometimes actually still a tough thing and a tough pill to swallow, at least for me personally. And this is something that we can touch on here in a couple of seconds, but also then with the water retention as well. So lots of similarities that we went through here during this mini cut. One of those things, so for example, with the stress, we touched on this one a little bit already last week, right? Due to traveling and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. So in regards to then water retention and also the momentum, I made a post about it, and every single time that I'm entering a cutting phase, of course, it takes like 1 to 2 weeks to get accustomed to the caloric deficit. I feel once you're in the groove, things are just running smoothly. Of course, fatigue kicks in at some point. Of course, the pumps aren't really as great as they are, but depending on the severity of the deficit, I think it's something that is still manageable. And even though that I know that it's time to reverse, even though that I did my due diligence, same as you hit the target. I am still always, after 10 years of doing this, always having a little bit of a harder time making that transition, even though that I rationally know that it's the right decision. I even count up all of the reasons as to why I should go out. And there are no particular reasons for why I should continue. And still, because I'm a stickler for momentum, I have a hard time actually then breaking that momentum and moving into the other direction. What's your take on this, and how do you feel about this when it is that these times come for you?
Yeah, I try and be really kind of robotic about it and ignore the I guess ape-like wants. Like my chimp brain is just like, you can continue the momentum. You don't need to eat as much, because even the day I decided to end it, so Thursday, and I knew on Friday I was going to have more. Friday morning, I just felt better, like immediately. Psychologically, I was just like, hey, it's over. Like you can worry less. And at breakfast, I had like a bowl of Cocoa Pops with my normal breakfast. I was like, this is great. I don't think I need to like end it. I can just like have an extra 500 calories today, and I can just like slowly reverse out of the diet, and I can just keep it going. And also it's like, hey, maintaining this level of leanness, which is pretty lean, I think, for both of us, like where we are, I think I could comfortably maintain this like low teen body fat look that is decent. I like it, but it's like, hey, like that's not the goal. The goal is to put on more muscle mass, because I know I'm not going to be able to achieve that through just sticking where I am right now. So I try and keep and remind myself of that goal, but not travel out of this period of time too fast either, because I've done that before. Like I've just reassumed like a calorie surplus where, I don't know, even on paper it should be, but I'm like, then the weight changes a bit too fast and that impacts my psychology. So I like doing a somewhat of a slower reverse out, and I'm in no rush to get into like an immediate perfect surplus. I just kind of do transition out of that. Not that I'm extending the deficit, but I still transition out of it a little bit slower than I used to in the past, where I was just like black and white, here's the switch.
No,
because
absolutely.
I do find that sometimes that's a little bit uncomfortable too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that the perfect thing is that the new paper by Eric Helms has come out that kind of confirms that as well. And funny enough, this is once again one of those papers that kind of confirms what it is that both you and I have been doing over the past years, of being a little bit more flexible in the rate of gain approach, where it's not like you have a set number that you need to hit in order to gain, but it's more like, hey, as long as you are making sure that you are in a net positive environment. Net positive environment can be 100 kcals in a surplus, 200 kcals, 300 kcals, and you aren't gaining too fast or too slow, then things are fine. Right? Because things are happening. It's kind of like a big city. It's expanding because there are more construction sites and more is being built than is being broken down. But it could also very well be due to a lack of resources, due to, I don't know, a shrinking demography or so, that the city is actually shrinking and more things are being broken down. And as long as there are plenty of resources, you're absolutely fine. And you don't need to stress about too much of being in a high enough of a caloric surplus, I feel. And especially when it comes to the psychological traits that come along with it, the overall well-being. And in the end, I rather, and this is of course going against my previous what it is that I've been doing in the past. I've been so often in a caloric deficit, like years ago. It has gotten much better, and I think that this is also that can be seen on the physique, where I'm just spending so much more time in that net positive environment, especially as a natural athlete, that there are just benefits to it. You're building muscle mass, you're feeling better, you have a better quality of life, you can be more relaxed with everything, and you have a better relationship with food as well, especially when it comes to cutting. You make things so much better and easier if you really take the time. And that's why I think there are probably more benefits of taking it slower than faster itself, most of the time, and for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, I'm inclined to also agree, just because also muscle growth is so slow for someone who's well trained, and that's like 99% of our listeners are going to be people who have been training 5+ years, where muscle growth is just slow. So like, Even if, and I'm there for this argument of maybe a little bit more of a surplus would gain you that little bit more muscle, but it's like, how much extra fat are you getting along with that? And then how's the trade-off? It's kind of similar to, hey, maybe you grow a bit more muscle if you push above 20% body fat, but when you come to cut back down, do you just lose all of that of which you gained? So it's similar here. Like if you end up gaining a little bit more muscle from being in an extra, like a larger surplus, say, do you just lose that, like, or does the time you spend cutting then just remove that benefit? And it's like, hey, you could have just been in a smaller surplus and net the same.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thought process to go through. Because in the end, if you can have a more relaxed approach while still yielding the same results and being less often in a deficit, which of course we know. I mean, I don't have an issue being in a deficit, but if I had to just pick and choose between one or two for the rest of my life, of course I would rather pick than being in a surplus the entire time. Because we all know that we are functioning better, that we are feeling better and all that kind of stuff. So if you can spend more time in a surplus while maybe yielding the same results, why wouldn't you do this?
Yeah. It's funny though, that paper, we have so little literature on this.
Oh yeah.
And people will use that one paper and just be like, see, all you need is maintenance, just maintain. Yeah. And I'm like, oh guys, like actually look and and even I highlighted some of these things. It was 17 participants. It was 8 weeks long.
Yes.
And actually something you mentioned at the start was like, just make sure you're in a net positive and not too large. The one group were aiming for a 5% surplus, the other group were aiming for a 15% surplus. And they had like dietitians managing their food and all of this. They ended up pretty much in the same surplus. Like they tried to manage a 5% surplus or 15%. They couldn't do it because you can't be that precise with it. So you just have to like give yourself a little bit of a range, probably be a bit above maintenance, is probably more anabolic, where it is more anabolic. It's going to edge you in that right direction. But yeah, it does seem that being in like above, like there's a point of which there's huge diminishing returns and it's just not worth the trade-off. But it was also interesting. So that was one thing I found really interesting, was the fact they couldn't even manage to differentiate between the 5 and 15%. And then the other thing, I don't know if you saw this, but the biceps grew the most out of people, and that they had the most volume through them. They had 17 sets if you include direct and indirect work. It's like, so these guys were only training 3 days a week. There was mixed group participants. Like you actually can't, like when I think about more and more of the study, you can't take away too much from it, but it does seem to edge you in the, being in a surplus is good. Excessive surplus, not so good.
Yes.
It probably confirms where a lot of us already landed.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great conclusion, to not over-interpret, once again, what has come out. Because as of late, a lot of interesting studies have come out in the scientific, in the exercise science field. Lengthened partials, the training to failure studies, now this one, and those have... And this is not the fault of an author or anything alike. They just came out at the same time. Very compelling titles. Whereas like it kind of confirms some cams and puts other cams under a little bit of a pressure. And in the end, though, it's also something that one of my athletes brought up of like, what do we make of those studies? And I said, nothing really. Nothing really changes. It may shift your inclination towards one or the other a little bit more so, but it's kind of like, because you always bring up the thermometer on a radiator or so, right? You just like push it maybe 1 degree to the other side or so, right? It's not that you're just cranking it from 0 to 100. It's just like a little bit of a push towards maybe more so training closer to failure, but it's not that you're training to failure all of the time. Same with this study. It's not that you're going from bro diet or kind of like, what is it again? Go mad or dirty bulk or dirty bulk, 1,000 calories down to now only 100 calories of surplus only. Right? It's just an inclination and a confirmation of certain beliefs, certain anecdotes and methodologies that have been in place before, and maybe it's kind of shifting now the ranks in like a Formula 1 race. You have it on the screen, and sometimes the camera is not even on the car itself, but you can see on the ranking that one is overtaking the other, and then again it's switching positions, and it's kind of like the same here when it comes to all of those variables that we have in place. And about your training, nothing really should change substantially. And that's the thing that sometimes is a little bit hard to put across, because some people get the feeling that they are being confirmed in what it is that they've been doing, or some people are starting to question and doubt what it is that they've been doing. And if that's the case, maybe something is completely wrong, or maybe you are listening to the wrong resources, and you should take a step away from then the screen for a while and really just focus on your own training.
I think that last bit you said, there's such good advice. It's so easy to get triggered by like someone's post and just like, I don't know, they're claiming that you've been doing everything wrong. And I think probably this, the meta-regression that came out that showed that failure saw better results than proximities to failure under the conditions that were, again, people always forget this. It's similar to the surplus study. It's like, hey, these were under these conditions for these people. It's the same with, it's a meta-regression. It's a lot of studies included, but the vast majority of these studies were very low volume. And when you look at the meta-analysis of volume studies, hey, these included the same studies and showed a dose response to volume. So don't go so low volume. And like the answer is, you got to be high intensity, high volume, and find the right mix for you. So I think it's just easy for people to kind of pick their biases here. And Zach was mentioning, because I just had him on for a roundtable, which I don't think you've had a chance to listen to it yet, have you?
Not yet, no.
No. So it was a good roundtable, I think. And I would say that, but I think it went well. And I think people will really enjoy it. But he was mentioning how on social media, his study came out, and literally within 30 minutes of his study coming out, someone had already used it to support their bias.
Oh, wow.
On Instagram. And literally, I can't remember how many pages his meta-regression is, but it's like 30 odd pages. Like there's no way the person even read it. They just saw, oh, okay, maybe they read the conclusion. Oh yeah, look at that graph. That looks really good. That means failure training wins. And they just use that to support their bias. It's like, oh God. And then if people really trust that individual, then they're like, oh, I've been wasting time training with any reps in reserve. Clearly failure is the way to go.
And that is something that we've discussed like a couple of episodes ago, that I think it must be so frustrating for the scientists when they see that their when their scientific paper is being butchered and misinterpreted, and even being used sometimes to deceive people or cherry pick data and all that kind of stuff. I think that this does a disservice for the scientists who come up with the study ideas, the study designs, who take the time to actually conduct the study. It's kind of like they are being spit in their face for the work that they are putting out there, because I don't think that this is what they want these studies to represent. At least I would feel kind of, I don't know, annoyed by it if I were a scientist and someone would put words in my mouth kind of, or present it in a way that actually isn't the case, just to, once again, fit their biases and all that kind of stuff. And I just hope that the scientists, like Zach, for example, they have too much on their plate with conducting the actual science and research, that they are not even noticing that, because I think otherwise you're getting very frustrated with also humanity in itself.
Yeah, I think it's one of those. We're speaking off air, and actually I think I spoke to Mike about this, which is coming out, I think this weekend, about his show and everything. He was just saying, like, he's got to the point where he can't read comments too much because he just gets too involved with the comments. I think probably like researchers, like someone like Brad, like, man, the amount of times he must get tagged in stuff and like his name gets brought up, and he just can't keep up with it. He just has to, like you said, switch off from it, be invested in his process, and like let things just kind of ride out. Because I think you could, like you said, things are just nudging you in a direction. It's never really like changing the landscape. Like that's not likely to happen, especially if we have a good amount of data already. And then if we don't have a good amount of data, one study is not changing the game because it's one study.
No. Absolutely. And in the end, it's also kind of either you're doing the work or you don't, and you're just flip-flopping around because you change your opinion the entire time because new evidence is coming out, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that you shouldn't change your opinion, but if you jump on each and every single study and take this as kind of the reason why you're now changing things, it's kind of like program hopping in the end, just under a different kind of name, you know? You're basically justifying research in order to do program hopping.
Yeah.
And as we all know, like even the new beginner knows, because it's one of the most touted recommendations of what not to do, is kind of program hopping.
Yeah. I think that's probably why, and I can understand it, why some of like, let's call them quote unquote bros, just don't worry about the science that's coming out, because they're just like, hey, I'm doing my thing. It's working. Like, I don't need science to confirm or not confirm. And I think there's a better approach of having that kind of mentality, but also keeping an eye on the science, because it might shift you in a direction, which is where I hope people see us coming from. But I can totally see that people go far in one direction of, like, they just are so invested into science. They're changing their program every time that they see a new recommendation. And it's just like, like that's, like you said, program hopping.
I mean, I would say that we are more so kind of course, an evidence-based fitness podcast, especially with the guests that you have on, Steve. Still, I would recommend to most of the people out there to just like be more a bit broish and just more on that kind of style of just be brushing science and research off, and more so focusing on just bringing the heat and intensity, because for the vast majority of people, this will yield better results than overthinking, overanalyzing things and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And this comes from us who are basically kind of in the evidence-based field.
Yeah, and that's where the people on that side will say like, hey, it's actually quite simple. And I do think they've got a point that some things are like quite simple and you can make them quite complicated and you can dig into them. But ultimately, even things like, hey, reps and reserve, like that's a simple concept. It's just like, hey, there aren't many sports where people train completely 100% all out all the time to get the best results. Normally they keep sub-max for a period of time and then they push themselves and then they back off, and like that happens in most sports. I don't know of any sport where they're just 100% out of the gates all the time. So maybe this also applies. And it's like, hey, that kind of makes sense. But people just, I don't know, they see science and they're like, that sounds like a lot of words. I don't want to have to think about it.
Absolutely. And if you're not interested in science, if you just want to hit it hard, then the next section is for you. Let's take a short break about our coaching service.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We create the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
So back at it here. Hope you actually then paused here, went over to Revive Stronger and applied for the coaching service. Anyway, so going back to also what it is that we've discussed about kind of weight fluctuations and the regain of water retention and all that kind of stuff, right? Because same as you, Steve, I had a fair share with that experience here over the past couple of days. When I traveled back home, there were a couple of things that led to a very, very high scale weight reading for me. So on Monday, I stepped on the scale and it was at 77.8. And I was shocked because my lowest weigh-in for the mini cut was 75.6. And that was on Friday before I left. No, a couple of days earlier, but doesn't really matter. A couple of days in between, right? And it wasn't that I was shooting up right after the mini cut. It was kind of like the same for you. The weight was kind of the same as I left the mini cut. A couple of grams higher. I think it was somewhere around like 76.3 or so nothing crazy. And then all of a sudden it jumped all the way up by this amount by Monday. I know though why that is the case. First and foremost, I was traveling. And traveling for me personally always causes a little bit of a stress, even if it doesn't really feel like it. It's exhausting for me. Secondary, I was stranded at the airport because my flight, as always, like 50% of the time, my flights get delayed. I don't know what it is. I'm cursed when it comes to this. Steve, you're still there? Yep. I thought that you froze up on me, but you're just listening. Thank you very much.
It went a bit robotic.
No, you're freezing. Yeah, you're freezing. Anyway, my flights got delayed, and I was stranded there, and I was first coming back home at around like in the midst of the night. And while I was stranded at the airport, because of traveling, I always try to make it as easy as possible for me to get my food in. So I was buying some buns and I was buying some pre-packed chicken breasts. And those pre-packed chicken breasts contained like 2 grams or a little bit over 2 grams of salt per 100 gram. And for that day, I had like 360 grams of that chicken breast alongside buns. And buns and bread contain a lot of salt as well. And many people aren't even aware of that. So I probably had around like 8 grams of salt for that day, which is pretty high. And furthermore, once again, the traveling aspect. And I got tattooed another time on my back, which was a huge kind of area, which we tattooed this time, which was very much inflamed and also quite jiggly when I was walking around. And yet, even though that I knew what I ate, the stress of traveling, and also that my back was jiggling, it still got to me when I stepped on the scale. I still was annoyed by the number that I saw. But the same as rationalizing things about kind of ending the minicut, it was also there not helping that I knew what caused it, and still I couldn't help but feel a little bit emotional about the number that I saw. I didn't change anything about my approach afterwards because I tried to reflect on what it is that I felt in that moment, but I couldn't help myself of feeling a little bit annoyed just by the number itself, even though that I knew better that it will probably come down. What happened? One day later, 76.3.
Do you ever consider not weighing in those times where you're like, it's not going to be a useful number?
I do that regularly. This time it was just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
And it's so weird because if I now say it out loudly, then other people would say like, if it's just out of curiosity, why does it then impact you mentally? Because you kind of knew what you got yourself into. Yeah. And you were absolutely right. But humans are just irrational creatures.
I'm like this with weigh-ins where I'm so routine. Even if I know it's going to be a funky weigh-in, I'm just like, I just want to see what it is.
Yeah.
Let's just see what it is. And then I'm like, fuck, it's that pizza, isn't it? And then I'm like, hey, it's not like I just make sure I make a deal with myself. It's not going to impact how I go about the rest of my eating. Let's just get back to plan. And it always works itself out. And this is when you've probably had it with clients where they go through this sort of thing. And you're like, hey, just keep going. And they're like, oh, you're a magician. How did you know? It's like, I'm not. It's just, I have so much experience with this with clients. Like, as long as you like just stick to things work themselves out most of the time.
And that's even something that I've recorded in one of the voice messages that I've sent over to you. That after having done this since such a long time now, same as you, Steve, I know myself that well. And I went through those cyclical phases often enough to have a very relaxed approach, and I know what's going on. I know this sounds a little bit esoterical, but I can feel things, you know? Does that make sense? Or does that kind of sound weird?
No, I think it does, because I relate to that on levels of not just nutrition, but also with like training. Like I know when like a session is really productive, or if it's not. Like there's just things if I didn't even see the numbers that I was achieving, reps, like weight, sets, you could just put me in my body and I'd be like, that was a cracking session.
Yes.
Whereas I know when it's not.
Yeah. And it's kind of the same here as well, that the experience pays off so big time when it comes to also making decisions, how to interpret data, how to calm yourself down even, because you have seen it kind of all already. If it's not with yourself, then at least with some clients, simply because we have now that amount of experience. And It's very rare that something is completely out of the ordinary and someone is a special snowflake and you are experiencing something that you've never seen before. It's very rarely happened.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same here as well, when it comes to making the transition and rationalizing things and still staying calm though. Even though that you kind of want to continue, you are making the rational decision. Right? It's kind of the inner fight between your emotional self and the rational self. And I'm now at a point, the same as you, where the rational self is always kind of winning, even though that the emotional self is screaming and shouting at you. Whereas in the past, and also with athletes that you're working with, some more than others, the emotional self is very present still. And I'm not saying that emotions are a bad thing, because I think that sometimes when people are talking about when someone is quite emotional, it gets a bad rap. And I think that's not always the case. But with certain decisions in life, you want to be less impulsive and less emotional. And now things are just so easy to control. Even if you feel that you would like to do the opposite. Yeah. But you can put it in perspective and know that it's just kind of that emotional self that is shouting and screaming you and shaking you like, do this now. It's just like, no, that's not going to make any kind of sense. We are sticking with XYZ.
It was, I don't know if you get this with clients, but I get it regularly, Pascal, where they'll be very focused on like the last, on the like weigh-ins for the week, but they won't look at the weekly average versus last week. So they might look and they'll be like, hey, my last 4 weigh-ins have all been the same. I think we should drop calories. And then I'll watch their check-in, and then I'll look at their spreadsheet. I'm like, hey, your weekly average is saying you're down a pound, and that's the goal. Why would we drop? I'm just like, remember the weekly average here. You're probably going to drop right at the start of the week, just like I do.
Yes, absolutely. But I don't blame them, right? Because they are at a point in their lifting career and also at a level of experience where it's not the same as us. And I think it's so easy to forget about that we've probably been at that point as well at some point in our lifting career. And I brought it up at some point that I saw one of my Reddit posts from like 10 years ago where I asked ridiculous questions. If I were to be on the opposite side and had to comment on my comment, I would also be like, man, what's wrong with you, you know? But this was where I was at the beginning of my lifting career as well. And you don't know better. And how? Because you don't have the references, you don't have the experience, you may not even have the knowledge about how to interpret data. And that's why it makes it just hard. And you don't even maybe have the idea to zoom out a little bit and take a look at the averages.
Yeah, I probably, I don't know how often you get these sort of questions, but on Instagram, I get them quite often, where someone who's probably similar, like lifting age as what you were when you had that Reddit comment, and they have a really big wall of text question to me, and I'll give them like a really simple worded reply because it's just like you've said a lot here, but it's actually so simple. And I don't know if they feel disappointed, but I want them to just feel like, hey, like I'm making this matter way more complicated than it needs to be. I can't give you an example right off the top of my head, but like a lot of the like answers are actually quite simple when you like strip everything back. You look at the big principles of training and nutrition.
Yes, I don't get those questions that often probably as you do. But I think it has to do because you don't know any better there as well. And so people are always trying to find narratives and reasons as to why something is happening. And if you don't have the knowledge or experience, you think that it must be more complicated than it really is. And if someone tells you like, no, that's actually normal and you just have to continue lifting for the next 5 years, it's often not a satisfying answer because you can't really put it into perspective. It's just like, it can't be that easy. And also 5 years, people have such a hard time imagining what could be in 5 years. Let's just say like in 1 year or a couple of months from now. And that's why it's often such an unsatisfying answer for the vast majority of people. And maybe they feel unsatisfied because you reply in a form of like one sentence. And it feels like that can't be it. And he like, you know that meme from Frodo where he's on the card? Secrets. Exactly. All right, fine then, keep your secrets, you know? That's kind of what I think is sometimes happening. And people are drawn just to more exotic stuff.
Yes. I will say that I see that as a marketing tactic for sure. That used to capture me with, like, I don't know, people present information and it makes it seem like they've got some, like, they know, like, say they've seen through the Matrix. They know the game, like, better than anyone else. And they're talking in a way that sounds like, oh, that's quite different. And I don't know if that harms our marketing or what it is, but it's like, hey, there are no secrets here.
Yeah. And I think it will always be there in every single kind of niche and every single kind of field. There will always be new trends that are then also forgotten about a couple of decades later. And that's why we are recycling the narrative most of the time, I think.
It's really true. So with your curiosity, with your end of the mini cut, because you normally see a big whoosh in water retention, I remembered from going from like massing to dieting. Did you see that this time? Because you were probably leaner than what you maybe have before going into diets. And did you see that were you expecting a kind of jump in body weight?
Also there, Steve, I think that I have to be absolutely honest there, that in the past, I was just too aggressive with the caloric surplus that I then went into. Okay. Something that I've mentioned, I don't know, a couple of years back, when I wanted it to be true, that my caloric maintenance is higher than it actually is. And by that, also the caloric intake for surplus is higher than it actually is. And because of that, I was gaining very rapidly. And it wasn't just like water retention. It was probably a lot of water retention, but it already spilled into kind of subcutaneous water retention because you've just like replenish your glycogen stores to the max, and now it's already kind of a rapid accumulation of fat alongside that as well. And then the sheer amount of food, so differences in the sheer size of food, fiber intake, salt intake, and now my diet is very, very similar to how it is in the cutting phase, how it is in a maintenance phase, how it is in a gaining phase. So the only thing that is changing really is kind of a little bit of the carbohydrate intake. Protein is kind of relatively staying the same. Fats a little bit lower, of course, in a mini cut especially, because it has to come from somewhere for me in a caloric deficit. But when it comes to carbohydrates, this is where the biggest drop is happening. But it's also not a huge discrepancy as it was in the past, where I then jacked up the carbohydrates intake to 3 times the amount of a cutting phase. So, and because of that, of course, salt intake is very similar as well. And once again, I think that I spun up also there my own narrative in the past because I wanted things to be true and real, or the reality, but it really wasn't. I was just in a massive surplus from going from a aggressive deficit or so.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. I think probably a lot of the listeners can relate to that as well. I've had clients where, like, you look at their activity levels, you look at their body weight, and like, hey, you should be maintaining on closer to 3,000 than 2,000 calories, but it's simply not what's happening in real. It's not reality. And if you don't like listen to reality, then yeah, you can end up putting yourself into situations that aren't ideal. It's similar to, like, I don't know, someone just thinks they might look at even the research that's out there and be like, hey, 10 to 20 sets or whatever. But I get super beat up from 5. It's like, this is the reality. Like, you don't need to do more just because you think, hey, more is better. There's a dose response with volume. It's like, hey, if this is the reality for you, you're not recovering from 5, like, don't go adding more in here. You can get yourself into sticky situations if you don't look at what's in front of you. So I think that I respect that completely. And I imagine you're getting better results this way quite
totally.
Clearly.
That's the thing, right? I can spend more time in a caloric surplus for longer. And by that, don't have to constantly try to push myself into a caloric deficit again, because I start to feel uncomfortable in my skin, and then sometimes even convince myself that I'm in a surplus, but actually I'm more so at around maintenance, and by that spin your wheels. And so just because you've been a little bit unattentive when it comes to the rate of gain, you didn't really want to have it be reality and all that kind of stuff, you know. Sometimes we're justifying certain behavior. We are not honest with ourselves, and I don't think that this is a beneficial state to be in, no matter what it is in life. Because at some point it will always catch up. It's kind of like lying most of the time. It always kind of catches up. In certain instances, it isn't, right? But most of the time, I'm a believer that if you are trying to be deceptive, if you're lying, you are being caught in a web of things that is very, very hard to maintain over a long period of time. And the same goes there as well. The deeper you go, the harder it is to maintain that. And it's kind of the same here as well. And if you then continue doing this over and over again, and you don't see the progress that you would like to, then you just have to ask yourself the question of like, am I doing something wrong? And most of the time the answer is yes, because otherwise you would see the progress you would like to. And if you're then not changing something, then you are following a belief rather than being interested in progress itself. And the problem is, though, that I think that most people don't stick around for long enough in order to then fix their mistakes of the past. Because I think it's absolutely all right to make some mistakes and learn from them. But if you don't stick around for long enough, you don't even have the chance to fix them in the future. And if you are going through 1 or 2 gaining cycles, 1 or 2 cutting cycles, and then you give up, of course you're not seeing the progress because you couldn't really apply the lessons you've learned in a cutting and in a gaining phase. What's your take on that, Steve?
Yeah, super well said. I think experience solves so many issues for us. Like, even if we know, like, you could look back at yourself then, and even then you probably knew the answer, but you weren't in a position to be able to give it to yourself.
Sometimes you're also not ready, right? To accept it, to see it, due to several different things in life. Right. Sometimes we are not ready for the truth.
Because I think, like, I look back at me in my, like, between 2014 to 2017 gaining phase, like, what really held me back there? It was because I was staying at 180 pounds, which is 5 pounds lighter than I am now, like not much above stage weight. And I was just like, hey, this is this super anabolic environment because I'm lean. But then I didn't think about, hey, my training isn't as good as it could be. Hey, I've got a bit too much food focus and diet fatigue. I'm pretty hungry all the time. Like, your sleep isn't as good as it could be. Like, libido's not there. Like, hey, it's all the signs are in front of you. But I was so focused on, hey, I have to be lean to be able to maximize my P ratio. It's just like, man, you're missing the forest for the trees. And sometimes you need a coach or someone in your corner to just look at you and be like, that's what it is. But it's like you said, sometimes you're not ready for it. Yeah. And if you don't reach out to that coach and someone just tries to put it upon you, you're like, barriers come up potentially too.
It's the same as most people kind of have a good feeling and I don't know, they know that they could fix something around their nutrition or around their daily activity levels that probably has a better and positive impact on their life and overall general health. I think many people know this. But sometimes you're not in a position where you are willing and ready to change something about it. And that's totally fine. You don't have to rush it. Maybe when the time is right, you will do it. And maybe not, because your personal preferences change and so. And even in the end, if you're dying, like, I don't know, as a fat slob or so, and you're miserable, I really do hope, though, that everything that led to this point was still kind of a happy and satisfying life. Right? We learn our lessons, we make mistakes, and we can just try better the next time. And sometimes, even though that we know that we should do something better in order to optimize things or have a better outcome of something, we may not do it. There doesn't always have to be a particular reason for it. And I know this goes completely against the self-optimization that all of YouTube, all of Instagram is always touting and screaming about. Because we are living in a society where self-optimization has become the absolutely highest priority. And I know that this goes against this, but sometimes we just have to acknowledge the fact and the truth that we are not always ready in order to change.
Yeah, I agree. I think what I'm personally tried to be better at. One is on the front of like my training nutrition approach. Like by no means am I attached to any of it. Like if someone was to tell me like that there was something better out there, or I don't know what it is, I experienced something else and it was better, I would do it. Whereas in the past, I was definitely attached to it. For example, I can say this about morning and evening training, AM and PM training. I think I was just attached to that because I was like, clearly this is better, quality is higher, versus actually it's providing me better results in real time. And it was that optimization I was going for. I was going for optimal. But I think I ended up sacrificing other things that took away, I don't know, just caused more stress. I was in and out of the flat all the time. It was just like a lot to manage. Whereas now I haven't done AM and PM training for the longest time. That's not to say I wouldn't ever bring it back when I maybe have more time or I want to prioritize that, but I'm not. But then there's other things in life, and I'm trying to be better at this too, is looking at not just what I want in the short term, but it's trying to think, what do I want in like 5 years? How do I want things to be? Because like you said, all of us have things we can improve upon. And I can think of one really short-term thing is like with Ada, I should train her better than what I have for sure. Like she's not amazingly well trained, but I can manage her in the short term now. And with everything we want to do, she's manageable and I love what I have with her. But like, if I wanted to be this optimal living human being, she should be super obedient. Like I could teach her everything. But it's like, that would sacrifice something else from somewhere else because it would be time, even if that's just relaxing and chilling time. I think about this sometimes when I'm watching like anime in the evening. I'm like, I could be watching another podcast about training and diet, or I could log into the Mass Research Review and go into the archives again and just refresh my brain. I'm like, Steve, Jesus Christ. Like sometimes you don't have to be that person all the time.
No, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with that. I see, and this is a little bit also a philosophical thing and esoteric thing. Life is kind of a journey. You don't really know when it's going to end. And you can just like take one step after the other and try your very best to be the person that you want to become. And sometimes along the way, that may even change, right? Maybe you will find yourself enlightened, having seen a demon in your dreams that told you to take a lot of drugs now, go to Bali, find yourself and all that kind of stuff, leave your family behind. And if you're going to do this, I mean, my personal opinion may not support this, but if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do, because in the end, come on, right? And when it then comes to those kind of things, especially around diet and nutrition, some people are caught also there in a little bit of a web where they think and know what I'm eating right now may not be the best. Some of the habits may not be the best. And it boils down to the question like, are you ready and willing to change? Because if you're not, complaining doesn't really do anything except for maybe wasting your time. Then try to continue this way up to the point where it kind of annoys you, and where you maybe even have the capacity from a mental and also physical capacity and ability to then focus on making a change. And that change doesn't have to be drastic. It can be something like fixing one little thing at a time. Right? But I don't blame anyone if they are stuck somewhere and they can't seem to fix that in the initial time being, but have to then revisit in a couple of months or years.
Yeah. And I think to use the example of your caffeine, I mentioned before, like don't go, because I think for people to think about removing something or making a huge change, I know this is less our style of coaching, but I still take like a page out of their book of like habit coaches. It's just like one small thing at a time. Hey, you bring on a new client, let's just start supplementing with fish oil. That's all we're going to change. And then they get that down every day. It's like, okay, now we're going to add a piece of fruit to your breakfast and we're going to have a protein shake. And that's all they do. And it's like just slowly building upon these habits, like transitioning yourself into things versus like, I need a huge lifestyle change.
Yeah, exactly. And we all know that this is failing most of the time. We see it. We have anecdotal evidence about New Year's resolutions where people say that they want to change a lot. Then they are trying to completely change their entire lifestyle. And then it's just bound to fail because it's just too many changes at once, and maintaining that as well is just too hard because it's exhaustive. And once again, to also come back though on some of the habits, some people have a partner at home that they want to spend a little bit more time with and be a little bit more flexible when it comes to eating out. And they know they want to change this. They know they want to fix it in order to actually maybe have a little bit of a better time with their partner who's maybe not into fitness. But right now they can't. And then my answer would just be, okay, are you harming or damaging your relationship with that? And if the answer is no, maybe right now is not the time to focus on it. Easy as that. I think you don't have to beat yourself up about those things.
Yeah, I think it's looking at that, the like pros versus cons. If you're not currently doing harm, then there's no real reason to change. And hopefully you can catch it before there is harm. But sometimes it needs to start, like I don't know, caffeine as another, like using that example. Maybe you need it to start impacting your sleep negatively before you decide to change it. And that's okay, because you've got no real impetus before that.
Yeah, what's important though to note here is I'm not encouraging to just lean back and let life happen, because I also don't think that this is the way to go about it. I think that trying to improve something in life is good, but sometimes the time frame that many people set for themselves is not realistic, or you're focusing on the wrong thing at the wrong time. You don't have to fix nutrition right now. Maybe you need to change a different habit at the moment in order to then make it easier to change your diet in the future.
Yeah. Or it's like always going for that promotion at work. It's like, hey, if you're happy with your work-life balance, you don't have to push for that. You can coast in your work, but you can then push your relationship maybe, or
100%.
You can learn a new skill, something else.
Yes, 100%. Like for Katie is the best example. She's overqualified for her position, but she enjoys the work. She enjoys it there. She also has a lot of freedom when it comes to spending time with her family as well. And these are the benefits that come along with it, which are much, much more worth to her than that promotion and maybe earning a little bit more, which also has its benefits. And especially when it comes to aspirations, own personal aspirations, sometimes it's not the right time. And maybe it comes in the future when she's at the point where she may not enjoy it as much anymore, right? You never know.
For sure. No, I think that's a good example. And I guess on that note, we can leave it here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I was disappointed. Sorry. I was going to say I was disappointed. I think in the comments, only one person tried to guess my coach. Not that I have a coach, and not that I'm definitely going to get one. He didn't pick out the person, no. Richard, thank you always for commenting, though.
Yeah,
if you're still listening, we appreciate your support every single time.
Absolutely. Next week, Mike is once again on the podcast because I will be on my honeymoon trip. Yes, guys, I'm getting married again. It's the same wife, though. Don't worry about it. It's just the official celebration. And I like to say that it's kind of the marriage. And then we are going away, leaving Steve behind in the shitty weather that is in London at the moment. And we are on Mallorca. Oh, I shouldn't have said that, right? I'm just like...
They're going to hunt you down.
Exactly. Mallorca isn't that big, you know?
Especially to find a German with a Attack on Titan tattoo on his back. Yeah, you wouldn't. Yeah,
I will walk around with a t-shirt though the entire time, even when I'm actually hopping into the swimming pool. Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah,
and I can't spend a lot of time in the water. Unfortunately, because we have a pool at our apartment, which sucks. But I mean, then I'm playing kind of like a safeguard or a lifeguard from Baywatch, because the kids will then be in the swimming pool. I'm just outside looking out for them.
Sounds good. That's going to be a lot of fun. And we can talk about it once you're back.
Absolutely.
If you survive.
If I survive, that's true. But I heard that the last passenger flight crashed back in 2015, Steve. That's a fucking long time.
Just generally across the world?
Yes. Like a crash from a passenger plane. It could be wrong that my research, which was very, very, very in-depth, exactly, was wrong. But isn't that crazy?
Yeah,
the safety measures when it comes to flying is absolutely crazy.
I'm already not.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say I'm already not looking forward to the flight to Germany, even though it's like 2 hours.
Also, once again, humans are irrational creatures, because if you look at the statistics when it comes to passenger flights and the crashing amount, it's ridiculous in comparison to other risks in life, right? And yet you are so worried, you are so concerned about flying.
Makes no sense.
No. Anyway, guys, on that note, thank you very much as always for tuning in. And I guess I speak to you in 2 weeks' time, but Steve and Mike will speak to you in 1 week.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality and we know how to do it. And we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut Movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.